My dad called me a failure at my graduation from Stanford, then praised my jobless brother who dropped out of both college and law school to become a filmmaker that never actually made films. Years later, they ambushed me with a fake family business proposal demanding millions after discovering my tech success. When I refused, my brother revealed the shocking reason for their lifelong resentment. I wasn't my father's biological child, but the son of a tech entrepreneur whose career path I'd unknowingly followed, explaining why they'd always sabotaged my engineering dreams. I've spent my entire life as the family disappointment. Growing up, my father always favored my older brother Thomas. From the day I was born, it was like I could never do anything right in my dad's eyes. I was always compared to Thomas, who was considered the golden child and could do no wrong, while I was treated like a burden. Let me give you some background about our family. My parents, John and Marie, raised Thomas and me in an upscale neighborhood in Connecticut. Dad was a corporate attorney at a prestigious firm, while Mom managed her family's real estate business. We lived in a large colonial home with all the trappings of upper-middle-class success. Thomas is 3 years older than me, and from my earliest memories, the stark contrast in how we were treated was impossible to ignore. My parents had Thomas's life mapped out from the beginning. He would attend my father's alma mater, join his fraternity, graduate with a business degree, and eventually take his rightful place at my father's law firm. Everything Thomas did was viewed through this lens of the grand plan they had for him. I, on the other hand, was treated like an afterthought. While Thomas received expensive tutoring at the slightest academic struggle, I was told to figure it out when I needed help. When I expressed interest in computers and engineering at age 10, my father dismissed it as playing with toys and refused to buy me the coding camp I begged for, despite sending Thomas to expensive sports camps every summer. The contrast in our birthday celebrations was particularly painful. Thomas's birthdays were lavish affairs with dozens of guests, catered food, and expensive gifts. For my 16th birthday, I received a used laptop for schoolwork while Thomas had gotten a brand new BMW for his 16th. My birthday dinner that year was canceled last minute because my father had an important client meeting. I later found out he'd taken Thomas to a basketball game that night instead. Despite growing up in the shadow of my father's expectations for Thomas, I excelled academically on my own. I maintained a perfect GPA, taught myself coding, and won the state science fair with a project on renewable energy systems I designed without any parental support. My teachers often told my parents I had exceptional talent for mathematics and engineering, but these comments were met with polite disinterest. My dream was to attend Stanford for computer engineering, a path completely different from the law career my father envisioned for his sons. I worked tirelessly toward this goal, assuming that my academic achievements would finally earn my parents' approval and support. Senior year, I was ecstatic to receive an acceptance letter from Stanford, along with several other top engineering programs. When I showed my father the Stanford acceptance letter, expecting him to finally be proud, he glanced at it briefly and said, "Engineering? That's for people who couldn't cut it in law or medicine. Thomas is going to Yale Law next year. That's a real achievement." He never mentioned my acceptance again. The contrast became even more jarring when Thomas was rejected from Yale Law and several other top schools, ultimately settling for our state university. Rather than acknowledging his academic shortcomings, my parents blamed unfair admissions processes and corrupt selection committees. They immediately purchased him a luxury condo near campus so he wouldn't have to live in substandard dorms. When I asked about housing assistance for Stanford, my father's response was crushing. "Stanford? I assumed you'd be going to state with your brother where tuition is reasonable. Stanford is completely out of the question financially." This was when I discovered the truth about my financial situation. My parents had set up a substantial trust fund for Thomas's education and early career support, but nothing comparable for me. When I confronted them about this disparity, they claimed they'd always intended to help me too, but Thomas's needs came first since he was the eldest. "We've already spent over $300,000 on Thomas's first attempt at college," And now we need to support him through law school, my mother explained. There's just not enough left for Stanford. My father was even more dismissive. You've always been resourceful. Apply for scholarships. Take out loans like normal people. Maybe after a year or two at State, we can discuss transferring if you still want to pursue this engineering hobby. Determined not to give up on my dreams, I applied for every scholarship available, worked 3 part-time jobs, and secured several prestigious STEM grants. Through sheer determination, I cobbled together enough funding to attend Stanford after all, though I knew I'd graduate with substantial debt despite my scholarships. Meanwhile, Thomas dropped out of law school after just 1 semester, claiming it was too political and not creative enough. Rather than expressing disappointment, my parents immediately pivoted to supporting his new passion, becoming a filmmaker. They purchased expensive camera equipment, funded a documentary project that never materialized, and continued paying for his luxury condo while he developed his artistic vision. Finally, after 4 grueling years balancing rigorous academics with multiple jobs, I was graduating with honors from Stanford with my computer engineering degree. Despite everything, I invited my family to my graduation ceremony. A small part of me hoped that finally, with this prestigious degree in hand, my father would acknowledge my achievements. The day of my graduation, my family arrived late, missing most of the ceremony, but making it in time to see me walk across the stage. When we met afterward, my father looked at my honors cords and special recognition as a top engineering graduate and said, "I guess they hand these out to everyone now. Is there anyone who doesn't graduate with honors at these tech schools?" Then he immediately turned to Thomas and said loudly, "Your film school application looks promising. That's where the real future is, creative industries, not coding in a cubicle all day." I was crushed. I had worked so hard, overcome so many obstacles, only to be belittled on what should have been one of the proudest days of my life. My mother, seeing my expression, tried to smooth things over by suggesting we go to dinner, but the damage was done. At the restaurant, things only got worse. The entire meal was spent with my father and Thomas discussing Thomas's latest filmmaking project and how it was sure to be his breakthrough. My graduation wasn't mentioned again. When the check came, my father pushed it toward me, saying, "You're the MIT graduate with the engineering job lined up. Time to start contributing to the family." That night, I made a decision. I was done trying to earn approval that would never come. I was done being the family scapegoat. I decided to accept a job offer in another state and make a clean break. The next 3 years were transformative. I excelled at a leading tech firm in Silicon Valley and was promoted twice. Despite starting with substantial student loan debt, I paid it down aggressively while still managing to save for a modest condo in the overheated Bay Area market. I had built a life I was proud of, surrounded by colleagues who respected my technical abilities and friends who appreciated me for who I was. During the next 5 years, I built a successful career at a leading tech company, eventually becoming a senior engineer and later co-founding a cybersecurity startup that gained significant industry attention. I maintained minimal contact with my family, a brief text on birthdays, generic holiday cards, but nothing substantial. Then came the social media ambush. One evening, I was scrolling through LinkedIn when I noticed multiple notifications. My father had created an account and was aggressively commenting on all my professional updates and achievements. His comments were jarringly tone-deaf. "So proud of my son following the family tradition of excellence." And "Another win for the family legacy" on posts from years ago. This digital bombardment continued across platforms. On Instagram, my mother suddenly began tagging me in throwback family photos with captions like, "Always knew my brilliant boy would make us proud. Proud mom tech genius," despite never having shown any interest in my career before. Even Thomas joined in, sending me direct messages about his new podcast about successful siblings supporting each other, and how he wanted to interview me as his first guest to showcase our amazing family dynamic. It was surreal and transparent. They'd discovered I was successful and were attempting to retroactively associate themselves with my achievements. I ignored it all until I received an email from my father with the subject line, "Family Investment Opportunity." The email outlined their latest situation. They'd lost the family home to foreclosure, but had a brilliant opportunity to purchase an even more impressive property in an exclusive neighborhood. The catch? They needed a family investor to put up $1.8 million as a down payment. My father had attached architectural plans for a home theater, a family office where we could collaborate on business ventures, and, most tellingly, a separate wing for Thomas's creative studio. The email concluded with, "This isn't charity, it's a chance for you to reinvest in the family that gave you the foundation for your success. Plus, imagine the networking opportunities when we host gatherings for our social circle and your tech colleagues. Your brother already has ideas for fundraising events for his documentary series." I didn't respond to the email. 3 days later, I received a calendar invitation for a family business summit at an upscale restaurant in my city. They had apparently flown across the country without confirmation I would even meet them. Out of morbid curiosity, I decided to go. When I arrived at the restaurant, I found my parents and Thomas already seated at the best table, dressed in expensive new clothes. A leather portfolio with a custom logo reading Family Legacy Ventures sat in front of my father. "There he is," my father announced loudly as I approached. "The tech wizard himself." He stood to embrace me as if we'd always been close. My mother air-kissed both my cheeks and said, "We've been telling everyone about your incredible success," gesturing to a neighboring table of confused diners who clearly had no idea who we were. Thomas, sporting a new haircut and designer glasses, handed me a business card that read, "Thomas, last name, Chief Creative Officer, Family Legacy Ventures," with nothing but a Gmail address underneath. The entire dinner was a bizarre performance. My father presented a meticulously prepared slideshow on his iPad about the family investment opportunity, complete with projected returns and elaborate architectural renderings of the proposed house with dedicated spaces for each family member, including a tech incubator space for me. "We've already begun networking on your behalf," my mother said casually. "I was telling the Andersons, you remember them, they're practically royalty in Connecticut, all about your startup. They're very interested in meeting you." Thomas jumped in enthusiastically. "And I've been developing a documentary about tech visionaries. You'd be the centerpiece, of course. It could really help your company's visibility." After nearly an hour of this surreal presentation, my father finally got to the numbers. They needed $1.8 million for the house down payment, plus another $500,000 for family business operations, which, reading between the lines, meant supporting their lifestyle and Thomas's never-ending film projects. When they finally paused for my response, I simply asked, "Why?" My father seemed confused. "What do you mean, why? Why would I invest millions in a family that never invested in me? Why would I fund Thomas's projects when you refused to help with my education? Why would I put my hard-earned money into a house with people who called me a failure at my own graduation?" The facade cracked instantly. My father's cordial expression hardened into something more familiar, contempt. "Because you owe us," he snapped. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. Everything you have is because of the opportunities we provided." My mother tried a different approach. "Sweetheart, families support each other. Thomas is going through a difficult creative period, and we're just trying to help him reach his potential. You've already achieved so much." "No," I interrupted firmly. "I achieved what I have despite you, not because of you. You wouldn't even help me with Stanford while spending a fortune on Thomas's multiple failed attempts at finding himself." Thomas suddenly looked uncomfortable. For the first time that evening, a flash of genuine emotion crossed his face, shame. My father, however, was furious. "You ungrateful," he began, but I cut him off by standing up. "Dinner's over, and to be absolutely clear, there will be no investment, no family business, and no more pretending we have a relationship that doesn't exist." As I turned to leave, Thomas unexpectedly followed me outside, leaving our parents at the table. I was completely blindsided. This revelation explained so much about my childhood, but it also opened up a whole new world of questions and emotions. Thomas urged me to speak with our mother to get the full story before making any final decisions about helping the family. The next morning, I went to my parents' hotel for the confrontation I knew couldn't be avoided. My mother confirmed everything Thomas had told me, breaking down as she revealed that my biological father was indeed a software engineer who had been part of a successful tech startup in the early days of Silicon Valley. "Your father, John, he tried to love you," she insisted through tears. "But every time you showed interest in computers or technology, it was like he was being reminded all over again. When you got accepted to Stanford, it was the final straw. That's where your biological father went to school." The irony was almost too much to process. My natural aptitude for engineering, the very thing that had made me a disappointment in our family, was likely inherited from my biological father. The career path I'd fought so hard to pursue against my family's wishes was actually in my DNA. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We convinced ourselves it was better this way," she replied, not meeting my eyes. "And then as time went on, it became impossible to tell you without admitting to decades of lies. So we just kept pushing you away from anything that reminded us of him." My father, or the man I'd called father my entire life, refused to participate in this conversation. He remained in the hotel room bathroom the entire time, emerging only after I'd left, according to my mother's later text. The next few months were a whirlwind of revelations. The private investigator I hired discovered that my biological father was indeed a pioneer in early computer networking who had worked at several foundational tech companies in Silicon Valley. He had passed away 5 years earlier from cancer, never knowing I existed. Learning about his career and seeing his old photographs, noting our similar features and mannerisms, was both heartbreaking and healing. As for my relationship with the man who raised me, I made it clear that while I understood more about his resentment now, his decades of deliberate emotional abuse couldn't be excused by biology. He had made a choice every day to treat me as lesser, and that damage couldn't be undone with a single revelation. After their family legacy ventures scheme collapsed, my parents' financial situation deteriorated further. My father eventually moved back east to live with his brother, while my mother found a modest apartment and took a job as an administrative assistant, her first real employment in decades. To her credit, she's been working hard to rebuild our relationship on more honest terms, attending therapy regularly and respecting the boundaries I've established. The most surprising development has been Thomas. After completing the coding boot camp I paid for, he secured an entry-level position at a tech support company and has been steadily advancing. He recently called to tell me he'd been promoted to team lead, his voice filled with a genuine pride I'd never heard before. Not the manufactured bravado of his filmmaker days, but real satisfaction from earned achievement. "It's the first time I've ever stuck with something long enough to get good at it," he admitted. "I spent so many years thinking I was entitled to success without putting in the work." While we'll never be the close-knit family depicted in my mother's fabricated Instagram posts, there's something authentic emerging from the ruins of our old dysfunctional dynamic, something built on honesty rather than pretense and manipulation. This experience taught me that sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family that deserves your loyalty. I've created my own chosen family of friends who value and support me. I've learned that success isn't about proving your worth to those who never saw it in the first place. It's about building a life that brings you peace and fulfillment. As for the man who raised me, I've come to accept that I may never receive the approval I once desperately craved. And surprisingly, I've found that I no longer need it. The little boy who yearned for his father's love has grown into a man who finally understands his own worth. And that, perhaps, is the greatest success of all.